So many of the best stories start with one simple idea. A stranger arrives in town and causes disruption. When a woman arrived on their shore in 1929, the residents of the tiny Scottish island of Iona had no idea of the chaos she was bringing with her. I'm Heidi from the Obsession podcast, where we get highly obsessed with weird things. And today we're going to look at the strange and spooky death of Netta Fornario, one of the most bizarre events in early 20th century occult history. As always, I'm going to draw something inspired by the story. Feel free to join me. Marie Nora Emily Edith Fornario, generally known as Netta, was born in 1897 in Cairo, Egypt, to an Italian father and an English mother. Netta was just 1 year old when her mother died, and her father decided that she should be sent to live in England with her maternal grandparents. Her grandfather, Thomas Ling, was an extremely wealthy tea dealer, and he was able to provide his granddaughter with an expensive private school education. As we know so little about Netta's life, it's impossible to say what kind of relationship she had with her family, but her grandfather's will in 1901 gives us a small insight into his values and expectations. His will stipulated that his granddaughter would receive an inheritance, but only if she remained under the guardianship of her uncle, remained true to her English Protestant faith, and didn't marry a first cousin. From what we know of Netta's adult life, it's hard to believe that she had much in common with what appeared to be a very straight-laced Christian family. After she graduated, Netta moved to Italy to continue her studies, then returned to England in 1922 and chose to apply for full English citizenship. It's around this time we have evidence of her occult studies, first under Dr. Theodore Moriarty. After the death of Moriarty in 1923, Netta became heavily involved in Alpha et Omega, a splinter group of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Now, in order to understand Netta, we have to understand something about the organization that was the focus of her whole existence. So, we spoke about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in the very first Obsession video, The Ghost Rider and Yeats, so make sure you scroll down and watch that one if you want more info. But basically, the Golden Dawn was a secret occult society that was founded in Britain in 1888, and its members studied self-development through metaphysical evolution. They sought to obtain a mystical union with the supernatural through ritual magic, tarot, astrology, and the symbolism of the Jewish Kabbalah, and of course Hermeticism, among many, many, many other things. Since the four main founders were Freemasons, the Golden Dawn had a strict hierarchical structure and element of secrecy and exclusivity. Unlike the Freemasons, however, the Golden Dawn accepted women, not just as members, but also as leaders. And although it began as a very middle-class movement, invitations were extended to members of the working class as well. Now, although there were people of all sorts of professions involved in the order, it cannot be denied that it was a magnet to artists, writers, poets, actors. So you get a bunch of mainly artistic types who love ceremony and long swirling robes and statement jewelry, and, well, you get people who also like a bit of drama. And there was a lot of drama and politics and intrigue, some of which caused one of the founders, Samuel Liddell Mathers, to be kicked out of his own organization, only to found the splinter group Alpha et Omega. Through this group, Netta discovered an all-consuming interest in astral travel and healing people via the use of telepathy, two things that she believed that she was very good at. She was also obsessed with the concept of green ray elementals, which were nature spirits, or, well, more like fairies, and I'm actually drawing some green ray elementals right now, or what I imagine that they would look like. It was also through Alpha et Omega that she met two very powerful women who would have enormous influence over her life and her death. One was Moina Mathers, wife of the founder Samuel Mathers, and the other was Violet Firth, generally known as Dion Fortune. Dion Fortune was revered within the occultist community as an incredibly gifted medium, and she was also a prolific writer. The rivalry between Fortune and Moina Mathers was absolutely epic, and Fortune insisted that she was consistently under psychic attack from Moina, even claiming that Moina could control stray cats via telepathy and make them leap out at her and cover her with scratches. Moina, a very powerful high priestess, accused Fortune of revealing secret information and kicked her out. Fortune started her own group, Society of the Inner Light, and her friend Netta was happy to join her. The beef between the two sorceresses continued even after Moina's death in 1927, with Fortune believing that the attacks on her were continuing beyond the grave. While there's a wealth of information out there about Moina Matthews and Dion Fortune, all we really know about Netta, apart from her belief in her telepathic healing powers, was that she wrote prolifically for occult publications under the name Mac Tyler, and that she was obsessed with the writings of Golden Dawn member William Sharp, who went under the pen name Fiona MacLeod. Indeed, Netta saw MacLeod's opera The Immortal Hour 23 times, and the pen name Mac Tyler was likely a shout out to MacLeod. A place that MacLeod often wrote about was the Scottish island of Iona, and that was likely one of the reasons why Netta suddenly decided to go there in September of 1929. Iona was, and still is, considered an extremely magical place. Off the west coast of Scotland and part of the Inner Hebrides, Iona is considered to be what's called a thin place, meaning that the veil between our world and the spirit world is very thin. Full of ancient ruins, including the Iron Age remains that were known as fairy forts, and check out the episode on Bridget Cleary for more about fairy forts. Iona was the site of a very famous ancient monastery founded by the great monk Columba in the 6th century. Tourists with an interest in the occult were a fairly common sight in Iona. Still, when Netta arrived in Iona, she must have looked incredibly strange to the locals. She wore her long dark hair in braids, wore a long flowing cloak, and was covered in silver jewelry. She probably looked more like a sorceress from Arthurian legends than a 33-year-old lady from London. The locals were puzzled by the amount of things she'd brought with her and claimed that she had enough furniture for a small house. She took lodgings in the house of the McRae family, and all her furniture and trunks of clothes and books were put into the upstairs bedroom. The McRae family were filled with curiosity and quite a lot of concern about their new lodger. She spoke openly of the patients she had healed via telepathy and claimed that she had to keep her bedroom window closed because the faces of these patients kept floating around outside the window. She roamed around the island alone, visiting fairy mounds and trying to summon the green ray elementals. She also put herself into frequent trances, hoping to connect with these otherworldly beings, and she told the increasingly worried Mrs. McRae to ignore her trances and never ever, under any circumstances, try to rouse her or call for the doctor. Indeed, she boasted of once having been in a trance that lasted for a whole week. Mrs. McRae noticed that Netta's silver jewelry would sometimes be tarnished black when she returned from her walks. Netta was indeed a strange woman, but she was nice enough, and the McRaes and the locals of Iona didn't seem to have any real problem with her. They accepted her weirdness and they let her do her thing and she let them do their thing. Then, Sunday of the 17th of November, in a state of extreme anxiety, Netta told the family that she had to leave the island that very day. She was, she said, in danger of psychic attack and had had a vision of a rudderless boat traveling across the sky. Mrs. McRae interrupted her packing to remind her that it was Sunday and that there would be no ferries leaving until the next day. Netta was in such a state of panic that she just continued packing and decided to go to the ferry landing anyway. While waiting for a few hours for a ferry that was never going to come, Netta managed to calm herself down enough to return to the house. It was, however, an eerie sort of calm, the type of calm someone has when they've given up a fight and are preparing for the end. She told Mrs. McRae that she needed a walk. Netta never returned from her walk. The next day, the family went out searching for Netta, and before long, all the residents of Iona had formed search parties and combed through all of the areas that she was known to visit on her walks. They continued the search by lantern as night fell, but it wasn't until the morning of the 19th that the body of Netta Fornario was found next to Sheehan Moor, also known as the Fairy Hill. She was completely naked, but for her black cloak and a silver cross on a long chain that was tarnished completely black. The newspapers reported that she was clutching a knife in her hand and that a cross had been carved into the ground beneath her, but the men who had found her claimed that the newspapers had embellished these details. They had not noticed any carvings, and although there was a knife nearby, it was just a butter knife. It didn't look like anything ceremonial or dangerous. There were also reports that she was covered in scratches, but some say only her feet were scratched. Some say there were no scratches at all, so we don't really know what to believe. Locals started to make strange claims about the area where Netta's body had been found. Some said that they had noticed blue flickering lights in the area, and some people claim that they saw a strange hooded man wandering around the fairy hill. Her death certificate simply read, "Exposure to the elements." Netta's family members had been informed of her death, but they did nothing to claim her body. It was the locals of Iona who donated their own money for her burial in the graveyard near St. Oran's Chapel. Her friend Dion Fortune seems to disavow Netta in her book, Psychic Defense, that was written about 2 years after Netta's death. Fortune wrote, "I knew Miss Fornario intimately, and at one time we did a good deal of work together. But some 3 years before her death, we went our separate ways and lost sight of each other. She was half Italian and half English, of unusual intellectual caliber, and was especially interested in the green ray elemental contacts, too much interested in them for my peace of mind, and I became nervous and refused to cooperate with her." She then goes on to say that she had predicted that Netta was going to find herself in trouble sooner or later. She was critical of Netta's insistence on going into long astral expeditions, saying she was not a good subject for such experiments, for she suffered from some defect of the pulmonary body. Whether she was the victim of a psychic attack, whether she merely stopped out on the astral too long and her body, of poor vitality in any case, became chilled, lying thus exposed in midwinter, or whether she slipped into one of the elemental kingdoms she loved, even as Swinburne swam out to sea, who can say? Indeed, who can say? Of course, the death of Netta Fornario has been the subject of many, many theories, both spiritual and scientific. Apart from Dion Fortune's suggestion of a psychic attack, there is also the theory that Netta was murdered by occultist leaders, perhaps for knowing too much about things she shouldn't have known about, and a lot has been made about the mysterious cloaked man who may or may not have been seen in the area. Some theorists even mention Dion Fortune herself as a possible suspect. Some theories are more logical. Remember how Netta's silver jewellery used to tarnish black very quickly, according to Mrs. McRae, and the blackened jewellery on her dead body? Could this have been caused by a medical condition called acidosis, where the bodily fluids contain too much acid and thus create acidic sweat? Acidosis can apparently cause confusion and erratic behaviour, so there might be something in that. Now, I myself don't have much in the way of theories, but I do know that the mind is an incredibly powerful thing, and there are cases of people who are convinced that they are going to die, thinking themselves to death. I mean, when we talk about people dying of a broken heart or dying of lack of hope, we're not just being poetic. There are even medical terms for this phenomena. Disexistential syndrome or psychogenic death, where a person with a strong belief in their own oncoming death can actually cause their body to slowly shut down and die. This can happen when a person believes they are under a curse or if they think they have a disease that will kill them. Think of the last time you used Google to find out if an ache or pain you were experiencing would be cancer or something scary. Did you fixate so hard on the other symptoms that you actually started to feel them in your body? The mind is an extraordinary thing, and we have to be very careful who we entrust our minds to. I personally believe, and you don't have to believe this, I believe that the magic is within us, and we don't need to be part of a powerful secret organization to witness the marvels of this world or the marvels of any spiritual realm you might believe in. And honestly, I wish that Netta had trusted herself more than she trusted the people around her. Anyway, I'm going to finish this illustration and I'll show it to you right at the end. So stay magical, stay safe, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.